This is a special bonus edition of the Death to Tyrants podcast.
The crushing weight of the tyrant's passage had left nothing unmarked.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram wrath. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of...
So, what? Have any of y'all ever heard any of that?
Put that Boogaloo. What is?
It's a code name for something. Is that what you said?
So I would say that
it's some kind of extremist group that.
What's that other word in there?
That are infiltrating
Boogaloo boys?
the protest in hopes of sparking a civil war.
Boys.
Okay, is it that?
I don't know.
There's a lot of information that he's part of the Boogaloo organization. It's a very radical group. Their mission is to create a new civil war.
Organized online, the movement mostly stayed out of sight until supporters started showing up heavily armed at U.S. anti-lockdown protests and Black Lives Matter demonstrations.
It's time for the Boogaloo Luau.
I fell in love with the turtle dove, now learning the farm dance. This poor little kid, why she never did belong to love before. So I made up my mind, and I struck a vine. The only girl I ever did love.
Oh, can you feel the luau spirits overwhelming you right now? Your senses. It's like we are in Hawaii for the Big Luau. Welcome to a bonus edition of the Death to Tyrants podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Austin, Texas, where this will be fun. I get to talk about a topic that's so forbidden on Facebook these days. You can't even say the term Boogaloo if you're on Facebook. We're just going to have to fool Facebook and post this. What could be a good title for this one? The CNN Hawaiian Luau, something like that. We'll see. We'll see. If you guys are not familiar with the Boogaloo movement, you will be after this episode. If you are, well, I think you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be fun. We are here to have a good time and talk about this with any kind of legitimate grassroots movement. Obviously, it's going to be smeared by the corporate press, as the Boogaloo movement has been. And I don't think any of you guys will find that as a surprise. So hopefully, if you're a little bit unclear on what exactly it is, this episode will help. If you already know what it is, I think you'll have fun anyway. So to do this, I brought a fellow Austinite on the show who knows quite a bit about this Boogaloo movement. And this is Diego Rivera. Welcome to the show, man. How are you?
How we doing, man?
I'm doing pretty damn good, other than having a mild case of the COVID, quite literally. Everything is fine, except I can't taste my food. So It's really weird.
How have you been recovering from it? How long have you had it?
This is day 7 and no fever. Nothing. I haven't had a fever yet at all.
Oh, wow.
And then really just my nose is stopped up, which is why I might sound slightly different, but it makes me not be able to taste my food. That's the weirdest. When you feel pretty much normal, but you can't taste your food, it's a weird mind screw up kind of thing. It's like, what the hell's going on here? This should be good. It looks good. I'm full. I don't know. Could have been,
Yeah. I mean, that sounds horrible. The fact that you can't taste your food. I don't know.
Weird.
If I love eating steak and rice, and if I couldn't taste that, I think I'd throw a protest myself.
Yeah, no kidding. And I love margaritas in the evening. And I've not had one since this started. I sipped a little bourbon the other night when I recorded with the Johnny Rocket podcast. And
Johnny's a good dude.
I thought if anything's going to break through this barrier of not being able to taste it would be bourbon, but I couldn't taste it either. Anyway, strange deal. Hopefully by the time this episode airs, maybe I'll have my taste back. We'll see. Anyway, I wanted to have you on to talk about... it's got a lot of words, a lot of names, a lot of titles. They keep getting changed. We'll call it the Boog for right now. It started to gain not only some momentum nowadays, but with that, some more mainstream exposure. I see normies on my timelines sharing articles on it, trying to show their normie friends the street cred they have now to explain what this movement is, or at least what BuzzFeed tells them that it is. Just to lay the groundwork, before we get started in this, get into the weeds here, explain what is the Boogaloo and give it, you can also refer to it by whatever names you want. It's got a lot of names. You could even drop those if you want, but what is this movement?
What I would say this movement is it, I look at it as like, let me be careful with my words here, but I think of it in several different ways. One is like, I think of it as like an honest Tea Party. Now I think we can all agree that the Tea Party was, it had its moments, but it essentially was a failure. But this is also, one is it's a conglomerate. It's a technically, it's a conglomerate of different sort of Liberty Fellows coming together. In essence, what I think is they're pushing for a peaceful revolution, but at the same time, they're also very aware of the reality of where our government is right now. And so it comes from that movie, Electric Boogaloo. And essentially it's just a funny word for what has been referred to as like, the second revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And so that took time, and then, it became, the Boog, the Boogaloo. Then they called it Big Igloo, which is, I think, hilarious. The Big Luau, the Catalina wine mixer, the Fiesta. And now it's just taking, like, it is so decentralized that it's able to adapt and change and move forward. But, it has caught some flack from, some people, but I think that that is a separate conversation right there for how this has been reported.
Oh, yes. We'll get into that as well.
Yeah.
So you use the term peaceful revolution. That's basically what you would boil it down to?
I would say that I'm sure. Now, again, this is a decentralized group, and there are people that, sometimes when you're on the margins, it draws marginal people.
Yeah.
And sometimes those people don't have the best of intent. But for the overwhelming majority of these people, these are liberty-loving people. I would say anywhere from constitutionalists to ANCAPs, myself included. I'm a Rothbardian through and through. But there's the constitutionalists that just, have felt that there has been an assault on their Second Amendment rights. There's liberty lovers that look at this leviathan of government and say no way. And then, there's ANCAPs that have been pretty much consistent this whole time. But this is mobilization, which I think scares people. And it's going through right now, sort of similar to what happened to the Tea Party when they first emerged. The problem is that they're, the media is essentially, providing political, cover for their friends and allies, and anybody not associated with them. They're essentially just doing, the work of the state in order to try to just bury this in bad names. But essentially, it's just liberty lovers, good old ANCAPs and such, who just, see this for what it is. But they're mobilizing, and they are mostly armed at these, protests, and for the most part have been peaceful, and it has not been them. And so it's essentially still just liberty lovers that, with a little bit of, it has a little bit of bite to it, because they are showing up to protest, armed, but there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. There's a lot right with it. I saw someone post something, Jesus, now seems like ancient history, but just after those protesters went up, I believe it was in Detroit, into the Capitol there with guns. And just a week or so later, when the other protests started, the Antifa types and BLM stuff, there was a photo, and it had these people from the Antifa group, unarmed, screaming at cops, and the cops pepper spraying their face. And the other photo had cops peacefully standing there watching these people in Detroit with basically full of guns and well armed. And the person didn't get the point. They put it up there and said, guess which one of these groups was attacked by the cops. And it's like, well, yeah, I wonder which one. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the one that wasn't armed.
Yeah. And I love how they just can miss that beautiful point there, right? Which is like, one, an armed society is a polite society. But, by definition, the law enforcement, right? They're enforcing the law but from who, right? So essentially the monopoly on violence is here and they're the gun.
Yep.
And if people are armed as well, it should at least make the police officers at least a little bit recalcitrant to the idea of wanting to move forward, because even for their own, I would not want to escalate in a situation where your citizenry has mobilized, come together, protested, and is sitting there with arms. So
Right.
It makes them have to, behave, which they often don't. And so I think it's actually beautiful. And I think that if the other guys were smart, I don't think they are. But if they were, then they would show up armed, and that has a very different outcome when they're armed.
Yeah, it's got an entirely different feel and mood. It sets a mood in a much different way. And it's funny, arming yourself with scary-looking guns really turns out to be a much more peaceful situation than walking around throwing rocks and bricks and whatnot. Back to this movement, where did it start? I've read multiple answers to this.
Yeah, and I think that's the right. It started on the internet is where it started, but it's the same thing with like any sort of decentralized group, is that it comes from all over and it's spread through the internet, and it's had more, and because of its publicity, people have wanted to come on. It's probably one of the fastest growing groups that I've seen that actually has some teeth to it. Like a Facebook post I had from about a year ago just said, "Is it time to boog already or what?" And I'm like, holy crap, it's been about a year. And by now it's been through different, evolutions and things like that. But it essentially was born on the internet, and a lot of the times through different memes and stuff like that. And these boys have they've evolved their language because there has been people that have, well, one is that there have been several bureaucratic agencies that have said, hey, just mentioning this, and it's made the news on both left and right news publications. So they've managed to keep adopting their name, but I think that and I think that they've done it so well. Again, it's just because it is decentralized.
Yeah, and they remain one step ahead of the people trying to either catch them or censor them or whatever. I love that part of it. It's brilliant. Has it grown big enough in your mind to be infiltrated by undercover operatives yet?
I think that's yes and a no, because one, it's very hard to see. Like, I can see pictures of people at protests, but often I see maybe 4 or 5 people at these protests, maybe more, but let's say there's a dozen or whatever. But they're from all over the country too. And there is a lot of, I can imagine that inside, these groups and things like that, especially online, where they have at least, probably have infiltrated that. But I don't think in the sense that, like, can there be, one of these guys in there? Yeah, sure. But I think that it's still kind of small, and that, let's not forget, like, try to look at these pictures. You might see just a handful of these guys. They take the pictures of them. They stand out for sure. I mean, there's a dude kitted out in a Hawaiian shirt, and he's got his stack ready to go. But try to find a picture where it's just like a massive army of them. And so I think that would become harder. And I think that these guys, they should be skeptical of just bringing in anybody.
Yeah. Yep. Well put. Anytime a group or just gatherings of people like this comes about, you're going to see and hear from the left, like the sloppy leftist sitting on his couch, eating a TV dinner, watching this on TV, saying, "These bunch of nerds, they can't really brandish weapons correctly, and they're going to get their ass kicked in a real fight." From what I've seen, it seems like there's a decent amount of military vets involved in this. Have you noticed that as well?
Yeah, I have. And so I think that, there is a lot of veterans in this, I think is what's fair. There's also just a lot of liberty activists as well. For the most part, I think what you'll see in like militias is like people that were in the military, people that were, that wanted to join the military, just people that have like a general sense of like wanting to do the right thing, and that are actually willing to mobilize or fight for it. And so it draws to those same people. There's a lot of people that are, would consider themselves, or at least sport the brand. So yeah, absolutely there is. And a lot of veterans have a very liberty orient. And I think it's because they worked for the empire that they actually get that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point too. Like, I'm sure you've thrown this stat out there hundreds of times, but Ron Paul drew the highest amount of military support in 08 and 12, more than all of the other ones combined.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is something you see quite a bit. Of course, with any group and gathering to the right of Bernie Sanders, basically, one of the criticisms from mainstream media is going to be, well, those guys are all white supremacists and they're racists and everything. I've not seen any of that in real life.
Right.
What is your thoughts on that criticism?
No, I mean, the one I would address it, like, I don't want to say like there's not a white supremacist that exists somewhere that doesn't slap like one of those flags, like the one that I have or something like that, that wouldn't just do that.
Right.
But, and I'm sure that as soon as a person is like, identified as such, that they would, be told to, kick rocks. Because it's anything, that happens on the margins draws marginal people. And like that, that's even true of like the Ron Paul people back in the day, right? It was a new revolution. And, that's like the people that they used to call, the people for Ron Paul that shouldn't be for Ron Paul, right? Like some of these people that you're like, oh man, this guy's a weirdo. So there's always going to be that, right? But it doesn't reflect the group. What I've seen is people, and I don't like the fact that they're out there doing the bidding for BLM and things like that, and cozying up to Marxists and stuff like this. But racist is not one thing I'd say. It's so lazy to try to label these guys as racist.
Yeah.
And it's just, I really do mean this. It's just liberty lovers. It's your ANCAPs, your constitutionalists, your, just liberty lover in general. That's at least an umbrella that they can fit in for a decentralized group. But no, not only that, but what I have seen in opposite to that has not just been like, I haven't seen anything that even comes close to that. But what I have seen is people saying like, if you hold these kind of sentiments, get out.
Yeah. Yep. There's, you kind of touched upon it just a while ago. I saw a march. I don't know when this was. I believe it was in DC though, where the Boogaloo Boys were actually marching arm in arm with some BLM marchers.
Right.
Have you seen that? Is there a movement within the Boogaloo Boys that is anti-police violence just as strongly as there is with BLM, we'll say?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say a lot of, I'd say that any liberty lover that's consistent, and, more than likely that's where you're going to get your like ANCAPs and that stripe of liberty lover, or just, anybody who just really gets it at this point. Like seriously, like you don't understand how, there is a serious police brutality. But I'm kind of torn, because at the same time, like them marching with them is like, it's good because, they're coming to these groups, and groups change and groups grow because it doesn't naturally, and it starts bottom up. It doesn't start top down. Those never work out too well. So, the fact that they are going over there allows them to break bread with some people. But these people are, some of these people are, straight up Marxist sympathizers that don't believe in private property, that want to destroy everything. But then again, I think of people like Murray Rothbard that worked with the Black Panthers, that worked with the communists when it came to issues that they could align with.
Yeah.
So I'm torn in the sense that, the BLM, the brand, the name is very Marxist, but I'm sure that there's people that are BLM that are not Marxist, but that's so I wrestle with this idea.
Sure.
Because you can even say it's not necessarily like the Horton rule where Scott Horton will say attack the left from the left, attack the right from the right.
Yeah.
But why not work with the left to bring them over? You know what I mean? We have the best political philosophy.
Yeah.
And if people can actually just hear it, which most people I've talked to, they never actually hear these things. And when they do, they come around. So maybe it might be a good time to, maybe work with them, because it's becoming increasingly harder for people to call these people racist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it does destroy narratives. Should they be inviting Marxists in? I don't think so. So I think that those two things might be able to happen. But, I'm not a central planner, and I still struggle to think of what the proper tactics here would be.
Sure. And I think BLM now at this point is so sponsored and co-opted by mainstream, basically corporations at this point. The revolution will be sponsored, to say the least. And a lot of the initial soul and the grassroots feeling behind BLM is gone. I mean, at this point, you've got screaming white Karens in the street with BLM shirts on and stuff. It's not the original, in my opinion, what it was meant to be. But when you have something like that, I think it is possible. There's going to be so many normies filing in because it's the fashionable thing to do right now is march with BLM. Maybe that's some of the people that you could win over and say, look, I think you've got the right idea here, possibly. Maybe you're just, it's kind of like they used to say about anti-Wall Street protests. I'm having a Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
They recognized there was a problem. It's just, they went about it all the wrong way. So sometimes there's a little bit of that going on when any operation becomes so mainstream, which is what's great about the Boo. It's so decentralized and not mainstream at all. And so it's hard to become co-opted by corporations and Disney-fied, if you will. Yeah, you mentioned the narrative a while ago. That march that I did see, I believe it was from Ford Fisher of News to Share, I believe. He gets all of these great shots. I noticed the arm in arm, the boys in Hawaiian shirt with ARs and the black people from BLM marching arm in arm. That was on no mainstream outlet, not one.
Right. And I mean, this is what I think I think this is actually a good thing, is that information is dispersed so much faster over the internet, where very few people actually might turn to their, they are in, their death throes, and information, more information is consumed over the internet now than ever before. And it's just, all you have to do is see the counter narrative just run right in front of your face to be like, wait a second. But I thought these guys were, I thought they were racist. I thought they were white supremacists. I thought they were evil people. I thought they were this and this and that. And then you're like, hold on a second. Now here's this, regular looking white guy holding the hands of a woman, with the BLM movement. And he's, essentially looking at her, embracing her and, extending a hand out to her, while other men are standing there in his same clothing, and it has that unification there. And you can't look at these guys and be like, oh, right, racist.
Yeah.
But what they did do is I did see the Daily Mail put out that BLM to work with right-wing activists, right? Or, whatever they use. But the one term they didn't use was the B word, on there because I feel like they don't want to. They're still going to try to,
right.
when they're going to give credit, they still don't want to give credit where it's due.
Yeah. Wow, that shows you how bad they don't want that narrative pushed. They'll use right wing before Boogaloo. That's funny. That's a good. I had not caught that. That's interesting.
Yeah, like they refuse to give it any sort of decent light. Now they just can't. Not like one. If I was trying to, put information out there, if I was a journalist trying to, and tell the people, what's going on in the world, I might want to do my due diligence and tell them exactly what it is. But at this point, these are activists. They're not journalists, so they're going to still try to, add their stain to it.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. The last thing the elite wants to see is groups of blacks and whites marching arm in arm against the feds while brandishing weapons. I mean,
yeah, and it drives them crazy. One of the pictures that probably exploded the most, and I'm sure people have seen, where there's a meme and it says the Boogaloo Boys are white supremacists, and it says the Boogaloo Boys, and it's a couple guys standing there, and one is Asian, one is white, and two of them are black.
Yes.
Yeah, those are my friends, and that's my flag.
Nice. Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah, those guys are making some pretty poor white supremacists by hanging out with the wrong crowd. It's almost like, this might be a false narrative. Imagine that.
Yeah, it's just insane. And that thing just went, and it went viral, and it went, like, I just started seeing it everywhere, where people I didn't even know were making it their profile pictures and all of this stuff. And I was like, wow, this is exploding.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's why. You mentioned that the biggest commonality throughout is the love for liberty. Is the Second Amendment the biggest issue right between all of this?
I would say, I'd say for some people, and I feel weird I don't want to speak on behalf of it, but I from what I can put together is there are people that they can address it, like anybody who's seriously consistent. That's not like some Trumplican or something like that actually feels like, hey, my rights are under assault. Whether it be the Second Amendment, whether it was this ridiculous lockdown that has hurt a lot of people. Even just there's a thing that says that 90, even just here in Austin, it says 90% of people, or 90% of music venues will not reopen in Austin.
Right.
It's insane. So this has actually hurt a lot of people, and I think regular people can pick up on that. But I do think at the core of this is the liberty lover, the Misesian, the Rothbardian, or maybe they're not that deep into it, but they're liberty loving people.
Sure. You mentioned early on a peaceful revolution is what it's about. And I've heard people liken it to the quote unquote second Civil War. Of course, the first one of the issues was secession. And
yes.
Do you see at some point in our near future or far down the road a breakup in this country coming?
So I, agree with all of the brilliant people that are so much smarter than me, for example, and anybody can just listen to a Jeff Dice and be like, wow, that guy is really onto something. But, he'll hammer that in, that the only way that we're ever going to have peace in our lifetime is through radical decentralization, right? And we can start moving it in that direction. And for some people, the reason they won't do it is because, they want their version of authoritarianism. Hold on one second. Okay. But they want their version of authoritarianism, right? And so for a lot of people, they couldn't stand the fact that if in, California, for example, they did want to, ban the Second Amendment outright, but they just couldn't understand the fact that yes, but that would also mean that in, Alabama, that they could live freely. And so some people just can't accept that. They want their version of they want their weapon. And they're willing to impose their will on other people. But the whole case here is it has to be localized power is the only way to solve this, right? Bring it back to the states, municipalities, and then ideally the way you want it is back to the individual, because the individual sovereign. And I think that that's the only way. If not, I don't think it goes well. And I don't know. I'm not omniscient but I do think that you can't have this Leviathan that is hurting so many people just continue to operate like this. I mean, it's reckless. It's horrible. I mean, DC is destroying this country. And then, I like Dave Smith's quote, which is perfect, where he's like, what republic do you know that exhausts itself militarily and financially, that, and then society starts to decay and then everything turns out all right? And you're like, yeah, that's a great question. And a comedian can see that. I don't think this ends well if things are not put in motion. And what I pray for is a peaceful revolution. I just don't know how likely that is.
Yeah, well put. Well put. Well, that's a good wrap on it. That was a great, passionate ending here. Is there anything you have to plug?
So if people like the flag, they can go to imtheremnant.com and get one. You know what I mean? It would be really cool to kind of see those out there. It's black and gold on purpose.
Yeah.
I took that idea from one of Murray's essays in the sense that, I would like to help brand this. This way it becomes harder and harder to destroy, to create narratives because they become obvious that it's just not it. And, I want the Liberty voices to be the loudest ones in this so that, we can have calm, rational actors that are still praying for a peaceful revolution.
Excellent. Well, I will link to that in the show notes page to this episode. Diego Rivera, thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, of course. Anytime.
All right. I hope you guys are much more informed now. And if you already knew about all that stuff, I hope you had a good time listening to it regardless. So this has been a bonus episode. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/Death to Tyrants podcast. Follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. Got to tell you real quick about my Patreon supporters page over at patreon.com/Death to Tyrants. Every month or so, we're going to put out some content on there exclusively for my Patreon donors. And we've already got one episode out. It was a lot of fun to record. I can tell you this, the donations there can be $1 if that's what you want to do. A monthly donation of $1 gets you in the club. That's all it takes. So, hope you enjoy this bonus episode. Until next time, have a good one.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Death to Tyrants podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com. Hey, you guys, I've mentioned a few times that there's going to be some episodes recorded of the Death to Tyrants podcast exclusively for my Patreon donors over at patreon.com/Death to Tyrants. That's where you can sign up to become a donor. Well, I want to play you a clip from the first one we did. It was really fun. It was myself, my co-host for the episode, Bobby Pearson from the Not For Everyone podcast. You've heard him probably with me a couple of times before. We get into current events. We break down why some of the musicians in our lives, our friends, aren't particularly intellectually curious. And a lot of them just have that kind of cookie-cutter binary way of thinking and looking at politics. Well, one of them put a not-so-brilliant post up about what libertarianism is to him. We have a really good time tearing it apart, shredding it apart, and I think you'll enjoy it. All right, here we go. Here's a clip. You know, the music community as a whole, here in Austin at least, they don't totally share our worldview, certainly our politics. And it's interesting, they're not always well-educated on politics, yet they can be quite vocal on political issues. I'm sure you guys have seen that on Facebook, and that's kind of what we're going to get at in this episode. I know you scroll through your Facebook feed, and I've kind of tailored mine so hardcore now that it's almost all libertarians. But I think a lot of us, and before you got off of Facebook, Bobby, would scroll through the timeline and you'd see like, oh, that sounds cool. Tom Woods Group. Oh, that's an interesting point. Oh, that's an interesting point too. I never thought of, don't totally agree with that. And then all of a sudden, what is that?
Right.
And it's a musician. Or maybe if you guys are not musicians or in that circle, who knows, a friend from high school or something like that. And you're like, oh no. And at this point, I think a lot of us have learned, what's the point of even going back and forth? It's going to turn into a yelling match, meaning all caps, of course, and one of us probably on the libertarian side of things being called a Nazi or a homophobe or something along those lines that basically means I don't have an argument and I'm going to call you a bad name.
And as far as musicians go, what I've always said is they have the politics of a public school teacher with the ego of a musician.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to their intellectual credit. And I think I would argue that a lot of these people spend a lot of time, partying, doing drugs, sitting in their echo chamber, talking, and not exactly becoming as self-sufficient as they once thought that they would become following their dreams.
Right.
And then you kind of fall into this whole like, well, who is to blame other than myself mentality?
Yep.
Is it capitalism? Is it the patriarchy? Is it the fact I don't have health care because there's no universal health care in the United States and this is an injustice? Like those kind of things kind of are like this perfect storm of this mentality, right?
Yes, exactly right. And I think it's almost a defense mechanism where, like you said, you find yourself in this spot at almost 50 and you still have what you had at 25.
Yeah.
And it's like, where do I look besides in the mirror for whose fault this is?
When your hero's journey of success like plateaus, or like the cliche is like you talk about those people you grew up with, the townies that peaked in high school or whatever.
Yep.
But at least those people are like on heroin and selling insurance, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
It's like they're functioning junkies.
Yep.
Why can't you be too?
Yeah.
But the musician, the artist spirit is something that I think we need. And it is an interesting and necessary tool to speak truth to power. But I think in our current culture, it's been co-opted by like rank and file Hillary Clinton, fat records, not my president kind of like binary one-dimensional thinking.
Yes.